Why pay more for your precious metals from the big guys with offices on Wall Street and who bank with JP Morgan? Get your fizz from the doc at sdbullion.com.
This is the Doc and Eric Jubin with the SD Weekly Metals and Markets Wrap. Well, in another week of big routes in gold and silver, we have a good friend and GATA Chairman Bill Murphy back with us. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Great to be here, guys.
All right, so it's been another hard week in the metals here, and not really an encouraging close here on Friday, with silver closing near the day's lows, right around 1685. And gold actually dropping down into the access market close here right around 1190. And now gold is only $11 off of the low-placed summer of 2013 that has held for the last year and a half. So, Bill, what's your take? It's certainly setting up here as we go into the weekend. It looks like the cartel will likely try to trigger those stops and smash gold below 1179 or 1180 on the access or Globex open Sunday night. Will we see a capitulation sell-off Sunday night? What's your prognosis?
Well, who knows? Any prognostications that talk about our favorite metals going up have been all wrong for so long, it's hard to remember the last one that was correct. Sure, it could, but so far, I mean, the HUI's at last December's low, 190. Since silver broke its base and that what used to be a bottom became a top, it's done nothing go down. For 6 months or so, it's been the worst acting market I've seen in 40 years. And there's a lot we can get into. Eventually, it's going to go bonkers. But for the short term, every prediction is wrong. I mean, it's so anybody who's made one, it's just been in tough sledding, and there hasn't been one sign in so long, not one that said that that an imminent change was coming was correct. And there's no such thing as oversold in a manipulated market, so it just keeps going.
What's your thoughts here in the short term, Eric?
I echo Bill's comments. I mean, it really is impossible at this point to judge what will happen other than to operate on the assumption that the powers that be would love to see prices go lower still. Today's big decline was precipitated by the jobs report number and the jump up in the dollar index vis-a-vis the 6 main trading currencies that the dollar index represents. And it's important to also talk about that a bit, because the vast majority of the world of Western financial actors, be it people on the media and financial channels or money managers or what have you, are keying off of the idea that we have a strong dollar versus the rest of the world's currencies, and the reality of that is not true. I mean, the euro and the yen represent the vast majority of the 6 currency basket that the dollar is typically measured against, and it's no coincidence that we've seen this waltz of the policymakers and the central bankers when it comes to the timing of which currency block zone depreciates its monetary base vis-a-vis saving the banking system efforts. And now when the Fed has switched into the mode of signaling that, they're going to tighten, and that certainly remains to be seen. Draghi is out dancing around, trumpeting up the asset purchasing program that the euro and the central bank and the ECB is going to be doing, and all of that puts pressure on the euro vis-a-vis the dollar, and then you get this kind of contrived move where everyone has the perception that the dollar is, the new safe haven, and that the U.S. economy is, chugging along and pulling the rest of the world's economy, and then on and on and on. That the nonsense is spun from the powers that be and through their media, trained dogs that repeat these messages. And the jobs report this morning was terrible. The vast majority of the gains were in a category of people aged, pulling up the data here just so I can make sure I don't tumble on my tongue, quote the wrong numbers. The age group of 55 to 69 had 230,000 job additions, and then their cohorts over in the 16-year-old to 19-year-old category had 45,000 job additions. And basically what you're talking about is the majority of that stuff going into retail and Walmart greeters and whatnot. So you have the Zero Hedge launching a headline humorously stating that the grandparents of our society are getting all the jobs, and here we have Walmart greeters being the type of jobs that are being created, and people jumping up and down on Wall Street saying, hey, isn't it wonderful that our economy is humming? I mean, you just can't make this stuff up. The vast majority of people who, watch CNBC for 5 minutes or what have you, or, read, or listen to reports on the news as they're just going about their day-to-day lives, have no idea the degree to which these, efforts to spin reality, MOPE, as James Sinclair calls it, management of perception economics. I've never seen the degree to which the lies that we see today be exceeded. It's kind of dumbfounding. And, hopefully at some point the demand for physical is going to put a stop to the decline. It's going to happen at some point. It's just really hard to say when exactly that's going to be, but we are seeing some encouraging signs with physical demand picking up in India and China, and you can certainly speak to what's going on stateside and with SD Bullion's data. So if anything that we can bring positive, that's where it is.
Yeah, it's not just India and China anymore. The retail investment demand in the U.S. is back with a vengeance. We've seen it at SD Bullion over the past 7 to 10 days. Both the volume and dollar values and orders have been probably up about 8 to 10-fold over what we saw in the summer. The U.S. Mint data is substantiating that. Statistics updated yesterday: 4.14 million ounces of Silver Eagles sold in September. In the first 2 days of October, 1.65 million. So nearly 6 million ounces of Silver Eagles sold in, basically, call it September, in a couple of days, which, if you look back, that throughout all of 2014, that's by far the largest one-month total, and it's about equivalent to how many Eagles were sold in the entire second quarter, June through August. We've been seeing it at SD Bullion. Shortages have come back into the market in a lot of the bars and rounds. Premiums are starting to move up. No, it's not anything yet like we saw in the big takedown in 2013 or even in past times like 2008 when we saw real big premium moves. But we are seeing the start of the signs of shortages, and really across the board, silver demand has been leading the way. Today, things changed a little bit with gold finally breaking under 1,200. There's a lot of gold demand coming back to the market, but predominantly over the past 2 weeks, it's been all silver, probably 150 ounces to 1 of silver sales versus gold over the past 2 weeks.
So, Bill, I'm curious, what are your thoughts now about the Shanghai exchange going live and doing physical delivery even for outside of China? Have you been getting any indication from people that contact you from around the world that they're beginning to see pickup in that market now?
Not really. I mean, so far, quite frankly, the whole thing about China and physical demand and the exchanges and what it's going to mean, and it's all been a total bust. I mean, look at what's happened. It just hasn't been any now. Does it mean? Is it going to be a big deal? And is it really a big deal? Yeah, but I mean, we had to laugh because of the international exchange in Shanghai. All the bad guys we've covered for 15 years are all on their board, or on their advisory committee, I should say. Yeah, you got Deutsche Bank, and you got Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan. The same thing. The guys are everywhere. Now, eventually, if the physical market there, well, people talk about going to take over from the paper market here. Yes, but if anything, it's been just the opposite since we've had all this hoopla.
Yeah,
the paper market's getting more intense and just completely blowing everyone out of the water.
Yeah, we did see an uptick in the amount of manipulation that came last month when the exchange actually went live. It was kind of ironic. I mean,
yeah, that's my point. It's almost like they're thumbing their nose at us. There's two things I would like to bring to your listeners' attention, because I've been jumping up and down about it for a very, very long time. The two indicators of the gold, of the precious metals markets for me, that have been this way all the way down since silver failed to get through 22 and so on, has been the silver open interest and the access market openings. One of our guys, James McShirley, who spoke at our conference in London, has documented that the access market has opened following the COMEX close at 1:30, opens at 6 New York time. 106 out of the last 110 times lower. That is almost impossible. And if there's anyone in the world that could say that this is a free market, that a market could do something that percentage of times, I mean, that to me was it's like a flag from J.P. Morgan and friends to their allies of what they were going to do to the silver market. Been talking about it all this time, and it has not failed all the way down. The other is the silver open interest. Because normally, as you guys know, you get a market that's falling way below the cost of production for many producers, and the price goes down, the open interest collapses. I mean, I've been around markets for 40 years, and that's what has happened every single time that I can think of. Instead, this time, with gold just recently not far from 5-year open interest lows, the silver open interest has been going up and up near historic highs as the price collapses. You take those two together, and they've been that way all the way down in silver, which, as I said, is the worst acting market I think I've ever seen. Because, I mean, every rally sold, there's no life, no nothing. Something to me is so wrong about this market, and then I will talk maybe later. I mean, I think it's going to eventually go bonkers. I mean, but in the short term, JPM crowd rules, and however they're doing, they get specs to go with them. And then they sell at certain times and maybe cover, but the point is it's them all the way down, and they've got the specs making a fortune on the downside. And the question is we get into, who the heck are these longs, and what's going to happen?
Well, that's a great question. Why don't we dive into that? I mean, Harvey Organ speculates that it's China on the long side. A lot of people, myself included, are in the camp that they consider the lion's share of the longs are just deep-pocketed investors and know what the heck is going on, and are willing to just keep rolling over and keep their positions and add to them. You've talked about that. You've also talked about J.P. Morgan possibly, doing shenanigans when it comes to their book. David Morgan has talked about the possibility of delta hedging with the over-the-counter market, bleeding into shaping how COMEX is being settled out with silver longs taking bigger positions. And Alistair McLeod's talked about how industrial users perhaps are coming in and putting on positions for the longer-term needs for their industrial production. To some extent, there may be some truth to all of these elements, and I'm a little bit more skeptical about the China card, primarily because basically the COMEX can just close the market, cash settle, and China can be given the big bird, flip the bird, and say go home. So I don't know quite how the logic.
Well, let me ask you this. This is what I'm getting to. Why is it this one particular market silver, and it's never happened before in any other market in history that I'm aware of?
Yeah, well,
that's what nobody. I mean, what I like to get to. Why this market? And why is it, whatever you want to call it, happening in silver and not gold?
Well, I think that we know the answer to that. At least the speculation makes a lot of logical sense, and that's that silver is the tail that can wag the gold dog, which in turn would shape the way the dollar market and the bond market goes. They're controlling silver because it's Achilles' heel.
I couldn't agree more in the sense that this is what something's very wrong here, and I don't know that they're going after silver, and that's why you talk about this excess market opening, and someone is selling in silver almost with reckless abandon. As you talked about, it's way below the cost of production for many producers. My point is, it's this one particular market, and whatever all the other guys say or I say, why this one and not the other markets? And I think that's going to be the key down the road.
Well, if anything, I mean, the thinness of the physical market of silver combined with the industrial demand that's ever present and expanding, at some point that's going to have to put a floor and then eventually a reversal to all this paper manipulation shenanigans that we see week in and week out. But it's always a question of how low is low.
That's for sure.
Let's change gears just a bit here, guys, to touch on a topic that is suddenly close to home for Bill, and that's the Ebola virus coming to the U.S. With a confirmed case of the Liberian patient who had come back to the U.S. to visit family and is now back in the U.S. for about 13 days, and I think 10 before he started showing symptoms. And as we were chatting before the show, Bill, it's right in your neck of the woods, isn't it?
Well, funny thing was, it was just 2 hours ago. I had to go get my ears checked. It was a different doctor. And I looked up, and there was the exact hospital where the patient was taken. It was right across the street. I said, oh, good grief. I was laughing today in my commentary that that was less disconcerting than dealing with the gold and silver markets.
So Bill's not too worried about it. What's your take on the situation here, Eric, as it comes to the U.S.?
Well, the biggest concern that people need to keep in the back of their minds is that the government's response to this crisis is going to be very ham-fisted and will basically, impinge upon civil liberties. And the executive orders that are on the books when it comes to dealing with a health crisis along these lines are pretty draconian, and they would make a lot of people's jaws drop if they read them. I mean, basically forced inoculations and forced curfews and martial law are the kind of things that can happen pretty easily, even if we don't have a lot of cases in the United States. If the government just concludes, oh boy, we have a crisis, let's all freak out and try to deal with it, and here are our, proscribed solutions, and there you go. You're ending up with something that can be a lot more damaging just by the government's response to what would be maybe, 10,000 cases in the United States or something like that. I mean, that sounds horrible, but over 100,000 people every year die from just maluse of prescribed pharmaceuticals. It's important to put the kind of things that are going on the news front in perspective. I mean, Ebola is terrifying, and it's a horrible disease. It's gruesome, and it conjures up the worst nightmares that people can imagine when it comes to these kind of things. But we're still talking about, less than maybe 10,000 cases in Africa if you tripled the reported numbers or quadrupled them, just as a fudge factor. We have a level of hysteria that's going on that doesn't match the object reality of the number of cases and perhaps even the level of threat, given what hopefully is a relatively hard strain, if there isn't even a new strain, which some people are speculating, but a relatively hard transmissible disease. It's not like it's 100% airborne or something. But, it remains to be seen what happens, and that's my biggest concern is how the U.S. government and other Western countries are going to respond. I think that their solutions will be worse than the problem.
Yeah, that's definitely a big concern, is the civil liberties that could be shut down or clamped down quickly if it were to spread. And while the CDC continues to state that it's not going to be a problem here, the government is telling a different story a little bit by their actions. I think it was yesterday or the day before that reports came out. They've ordered like 150 or 160,000 hazmat suits. So they're definitely concerned a bit behind the scenes, but I definitely agree with Eric. While it is a very deadly and serious virus, as of right now, putting the numbers in perspective, we have exponentially more than that, like Eric said, die from prescription drugs in the U.S., die from the seasonal influenza every year. So it's not something to panic about by any means, but certainly it doesn't hurt to be aware of the situation, prepare as best you can, and even the best thing is to have your immune system going into the fall season anytime as healthy as possible with nutritional supplements. Getting back to the markets a little bit here, Bill, let's talk a little bit more of kind of sentiment in the long term. I've said this lots of times before, but I don't think I've ever seen worse sentiment in the precious metal sector. Even in the face of the demand we're seeing, just sentiment is probably the lowest I've ever seen.
Absolutely correct. And if I might, since you asked, I mean, the industry's in a depression. The reason for it's the worst is because back in certain days, nobody was made money or wasn't making money, or times they gave money back. Now people are getting killed. And in terms of mental ways to handle it, I mean, you've got the Dow not far from all-time highs, and the gold shares are back to where they were in 1999. In other words, it's been a total waste of time, and many of them are going out of business. It's been an absolute nightmare. And so the psychology, and you're correct, it's the worst ever. And it will all change someday, and very easily could change overnight. But that's not the way it is now, and it's not what we have to deal with in terms of whether it's the companies or doing business or getting money, the shareholders. It's not to be a negative Nelly, but it's just the facts are facts. And it's when this all turns around, as I said even about silver, I think you're going to have it's going to be the most historic move of all time. But where it's going to start from, I don't know. This looks like the final campaign in this period, anyway, after what the gold cartel started in gold 3 years ago and silver 3.5 years ago.
I'm kind of curious. Over the time that you started GATA in 1999, you've had some support from gold mining CEOs and precious metals in general, people involved in the industry, but people have kept their distance from GATA. Have you noticed anything different lately? Maybe in 2014, has there been any kind of uptick when it comes to CEOs fighting with you and saying,
I was just talking with some people about that today. I've never seen it worse, because some of the companies that have supported us, they're getting killed. Some of the ones that supported us in the very beginning don't anymore. In the very beginning, we got Anglo Gold gave us $20,000, and Goldfield gave us $20,000. One other company gave us $50,000. And what's happened since then, they've learned how right we are. And we're taking on, meaning GATA, and we've taken on the richest and most powerful people in the world. And basically, a lot of these CEOs, it's unfortunate, they don't care so much about their shareholders as they do about their jobs. And they're afraid. They're afraid to go with us because some of them need, country permits, and others need the banks for financing. And they're all just going into the bunker. And it's terrible. And, of course, this is the result of them having that attitude. It is the worst industry I've ever seen in the history of industries. Because, what they could have done and should have done is get an organization to go to bat for them so they couldn't be pinpointed. That's obvious. That's why you would have a World Gold Council. Instead, the World Gold Council is against us. So it's just the opposite. I've never seen anything like this. And after dealing with this for 15, 16 years, it's hard to me to imagine it could be like this, but that's the way it is. So until the physical market sees up and blow these bums out of the water, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and it's quite sad that most CEOs in the industry that are presumably aware of what's going on just simply are not willing to speak up because they feared lack of being able to get finance or being blackballed by their peers or what have you. And then all the while, when no one speaks up, the sector just continues to get beaten to the pulp. If there was a trade organization that had maybe 30 CEOs sitting on a panel doing a press conference and discussing all of the various things that, for example, you've illustrated very clearly in all the GATA conferences you've done, at least I would, presumably get a little bit more media attention, but certainly allow the opportunity for more investors to just kind of stumble upon this.
One other thing, if I might say, and you're dead right, this is the scary part, there's no sheriff. There's no rule of law. What would you do in where you find out, in the old cowboy days, that the sheriffs with the crooks, the bad guys, the guys robbing the banks? After J.P. Morgan got left off the hook after 5 years of a study about the manipulation, of course, every other marker has been proved to be rigged, and one with all this evidence goes no place. Once they let that, dwindle and run out of time, let's say. They've gone really bonkers since then, especially in silver. There's no rule of law. They can do whatever they want to do, and that's it. There's no fear of retribution. What has J.P. Morgan been fined $28 billion the past 2 years for the wrongdoing in various markets? And they keep going at it. Their stock price keeps going up. Everybody's happy.
Yeah, and previous year's total revenue at J.P. Morgan was in the order of about $20 billion. Just to put that fine in perspective, we're talking about fines that exceed the annual revenue rate of the entire company. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous.
I would wish that more company CEOs would find themselves in cash flow positive situations. There are fewer and fewer of these companies every day, but to see some withholding of delivery, do what Rob McEwen did at Gold Corp, stockpile gold when it's undervalued and keep it in the treasury of corporations. Where are the miners that are, the CEOs and leaders of our industry speaking to this? There's nothing that, there's no pushback at all from the industry. It's
nothing.
truly sad to see.
Well, I want to take just a minute here and shift perspectives a little bit, Bill. Let's talk a little bit about the perspective here from the cartel side and what are the potential objectives here. I know Jim Sinclair has long stated that the bullion banks will be the entities that make the lion's share of all the gains in this great secular bull market. And kind of privately, I've always, since maybe 2006, I've kind of always held the belief that before the final big move, you're going to see perhaps the biggest pull down as the banking entities try to acquire as much physical for as cheaply as they can before the ultimate move. Do you think perhaps that's what we're seeing here? Is it just a symptom of them trying to control the dollar with everything going on with China and Russia and Putin moving really by the day, moving away from the dollar? What do you think from the other side of the ball here? What do you think is the motive, and what's the game plan here?
Well, you have the right word there. What's the game plan? And some of my colleagues have been asking for years with all these lease gold out and so on. What's their exit plan? And now all of a sudden, and I've been talking about this for some time in my commentary and discussions, I mean, it looks like an effort to completely decimate the industry and decimate the markets. And simply put, if they take gold and silver down to certain points, they've made a fortune on the short side. The share prices are headed towards zero at this rate. They'll get it to some point when they'll just go in and say, okay, that's it. And they'll buy up all the shares that they can, and they, through that, get ownership in the ground and have access to these companies. And if nothing else, we'll buy them at just less than bargain basement prices. And then if they can go on out, heck, they could go and buy all the silver they wanted over a period of time. And even if they drove the price up $100 or $200, get out of the rest of their shorts or get long if that's the way it's going to be the case. Or maybe it's an overnight reset where they drive things down and down and down and get the specs. And overnight, people talk about that, where come in one morning or over the weekend, the price of gold is reset. I don't know, but this certainly looks like one of these efforts to drive the gold and silver into oblivion. I mean, already, not only the silver producers underwater, many of the gold producers are now too. So it's just a complete horror show, and it's working, and maybe this is their exit plan. Just what you're talking about. This is what they've had in mind. They put it in play 3 years ago in gold, and they went into high gear a year and a half ago when they bombed the price for $200 when nobody was around, taken down from 1,600 to whatever, 1,400. I forget the numbers, and it's been the most intense period of day-to-day of manipulation, things that we can spot, things that we track every day, that I've ever seen in 16 years.
So was your game plan to smash the price sufficiently to acquire all the physical? The way you would go about it would not be to drop it immediately from 1,900 gold and $49 silver, because then demand would be
snapback,
unbelievably immense. But if you can, this would be the way to do it, to have a 3 to 4 year slow correction followed by, I think, the last 12 months, especially this summer, gold and silver haven't felt like they've moved at all. Like you'd look in the day's trading and silver had traded up a nickel and down 10 cents. So the average investor has been bored. They haven't been seeing any gains. They've lost interest. So you've completely killed sentiment. And then at the end of that, to make the ultimate smash, just from a psychological perspective, that would be the way I would do it.
That's the way it's trading something like that, and I don't know if it's happening or not, but we've talked about it, and that's the way it's trading, and they just seem intense, as I said earlier, those two key things to me, the silver open interest and the access market openings have been the clues what was going to occur for 7 months now. And they've been unwavering on those two fronts, and they're still there.
Yeah, and it fits into the bigger picture as well, too, when it comes to the grand reset theory of the financial markets overall, and in relation to the biggest debt bubble now being the sovereigns, the United States, the UK, the ECB, Japan. These Western economies have become so financialized and so overridden with debt that the only way really to deal with it is to do a number of things. Either have a long duration of financial repression of decades in duration, or, some kind of a grand reset. And when you look on the geopolitical front and what Russia and China are doing in response to all of the belligerence that's coming from the West vis-a-vis their interests, it looks like the grand reset probability, the scenario of that probability being what is the end game, as you spoke of, Doc, is increasing. And maybe it's in a 2-3 year window forward. I mean, we just had the head of Russia's second largest bank say that within 2 years' time, 2 to 3 years' time, Russia could conceivably have 100% of their trade denominated in rubles. The ongoing march of the BRICS countries across the board and all the special deals that China is orchestrating for their trade on a bilateral basis with countries all over the world, on and on and on. I mean, we must be somewhere now in the neighborhood of over 30% of world trade settlement being settled outside of the dollar zone. All of these things are, pointing towards the increasing probability that there's just going to be some kind of a reset. And if this is, in fact, the operating assumption in theory behind the scenes when it comes to our policymakers at the central banks around the world and Treasury and their compatriots and other governments, the pieces would fit to substantiate that idea that at some point they're throwing caution to the wind. And, we'll have a fiesta for a number of years to come when it comes to our economic statistics, masking the hollowing out of the United States economy and the, relative purchasing power of the dollar declining, but even though that's hidden when it comes to its trading versus the euro in the UK and so forth. I mean, even, gold in British pound terms is still up about 10% this year. I mean, most of what we're seeing, all of the various pieces of this big puzzle do fit together to point towards the possibility, indeed the probability, of some kind of coordinated bond default on sovereign nation levels. And if that's the game plan, then it behooves those power interests to make sure that gold and silver are quiet as the smoke alarms of the financial system.
All right, well, I think we'll wrap up the show this week here, guys, but we'll definitely keep our eyes open on Sunday night, 6 o'clock Eastern, when the Globex opens. As it sure wouldn't surprise me to see a final attack to see if they can trigger those stops below 1179, 1180 in gold. So we have the potential here for a waterfall decline over Sunday night. I'd like to hope that won't be the case, but kind of suspected a little bit here with the sell-off today into the access market close after a terrible week in the metals. Continues to be an excellent time, in my opinion, to accumulate the physical, but we'll have to wait and see how the market trading goes next week. So once again, thanks for joining us, Bill. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's great talking to you guys. I hope I can be on sometime when things are a little more upbeat. I can be laughing a little more.
Well, we'll make sure we'll invite you back on some of those days when silver's up 5 or 10% for the week. Hopefully in the not too distant future here.
Sounds good to me. Let's have a great weekend, guys.
All right, for the Doc and Eric Dubin, thanks for tuning in to the SD Weekly Metals and Markets.
Those individuals who are in charge of monetary policy around the world, I think they're very much aware of what is coming. When I've asked Federal Reserve Chairman in the committee about this, they never said, no, that's not going to happen. They used the word orderly. As long as it's orderly, it seems to be okay.